Larry Aldrich was an American manufacturer of women's clothing. He began making clothing in 1927, but his own name didn't appear on labels until the 1940s. Larry Aldrich clothing was stylish, but not fashion-forward. Styles from Paris were adapted to have a more conservative sensibility. He was a collector of modern art, and in the late 1960s was known for using pop art fabrics that he had designed for him. In 1957, Aldrich became very involved in art collecting, and made Marie McCarthy, who had been with the firm since 1943, the head designer. By the mid to late 60s, the label read Marie McCarthy for Larry Aldrich. In 1972, Larry Aldrich retired from the clothing business to concentrate on developing his art museum, the Aldrich Museum of Contemporary Art. He sold his business to Lou Prince, and the label became simply Aldrich. So, Larry Aldrich was the founder in 1964 of the innovative Aldrich Museum for Contemporary Art in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Initially disparaged by some as a rich man's toy, or even a tax dodge, the museum became both popular and influential. Almost all the well-known American artists you can think of have been seen here at early stages of their careers, Mr. Aldrich said proudly in 1986, among them Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg, Frank Stella, and Cy Twombly. Mr. Aldrich's collecting and sponsorship of artists who were not yet on the lists of major museums followed an almost equally imaginative career in fashion. His women's clothing collections were reviewed alongside the likes of Claire McCardell, Jeffrey Bin, Molly Parnis, and Pauline Trégère, and the dresses fought for the spotlight and sales with Paris designers. He saw a natural connection between fashion and art, and in 1965 he even produced a dress collection inspired by pop art. He was a leader among his fashion peers, serving as president of the New York Couture Group, 24 leading makers of high-fashion apparel. The son of Russian immigrants, Mr. Aldrich was born in Manhattan in 1906, and was all set to begin law studies at Columbia in the fall of 1924. But a summer job in the fashion trade convinced him that that was the better way to go. By 1927 he had his own firm in New York, and his first collection was already a great success. In 1937, he began to buy paintings by Manet, Monet, Gauguin and others. But when he became friendly with Alfred H. Barr Jr., the first director of the Museum of Modern Art, he found it more stimulating to spend a maximum of $1,000 per piece on works by artists who were not yet well known. All of these he gave to the Modern. In all, the Aldrich Purchase Fund gave 112 works to the museum, including its first acquisitions of work by Mr. Stella, Agnes Martin, Price Marden, and Tom Wesselman. From 1963 to 1970 he paid for a similar program at the Whitney Museum. In 1963 he decided to open a museum that would be the first of truly contemporary art in the United States. To help to pay for this, he sold his entire collection of works by Picasso, Miro, Chagall, Paul Klee and others at auction in New York. The sum of $1.3 million, enormous at the time, was raised. Mr. Aldrich bought a former general store and church just off the main street in Richfield and converted it into the Larry Aldrich Museum, which opened to the public in 1964. In 1966 he sold his fashion business, and in 1967 his museum became the Aldrich Museum for Contemporary Art, with Alfred Barr, Joseph Hirschhorn and Philip Johnson among its original trustees. From 1973 until 1990 backed the Soho Centre for Visual Arts, a non-profit exhibition space for emerging artists, who did not yet have gallery representation. Early in the 1980s, the board of the Aldrich Museum voted to continue Larry Aldrich's policies by selling off the museum's permanent collection and concentrating on artists who were not yet well known. In 1986, an expansion project doubled the museum's exhibition space. In 1991, when already 86, its founder established the Larry Aldrich Award for the support of emerging artists. Larry Aldrich was a rangy and debonair figure who, to the end, had in him something of the young man who was said to have spent his first earnings on a red Oakland Roadster, and had been seen sporting both spats and a cane. On his 90th birthday in 1996, he received an honorary fine arts degree from the University of Connecticut. A week before his death, he attended a meeting of the museum's board at which plans to renovate and expand the museum were approved by a unanimous vote. He is survived by his wife, Win Payne Aldrich, and his daughters Georgianne Heller, Susan Hubert, and Kate Strassman, 3 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. In 1970, Mr. Aldrich rejected the idea that fashion changes came about as the result of a conspiracy compounded by a cabal of high priests in the designing room. Instead, he said, a silhouette remains in fashion from 6 to 10 years, after which a creeping boredom results and women become indifferent to clothes. He cited the fading of the chemise look after a decade as evidence. Similarly, he always stressed that he was not following fashion in art, but seeking the spark of genius that might develop later. When objects of his collecting got too fashionable and expensive, he often dropped them.